Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome back. I'm hoping you're ready for the last hour and a half. It's a nice, quick one, but it's going to be quite an intense one because of the fact that we've got quite a few people on. And of course, we're discussing, as you would have noticed throughout the morning, the data has become such a factor in every single building block of your digitization strategy. So we're going to unpack that a little bit more. I love Bagary, the CEO of the data company. I love his presentation title, My Data, Your Data, Our Data, because this has been a continuous issue in the environment of insurance. Who owns the data and who manipulates the data and who shares the data and what data can you have access to? All of those sort of questions. And I don't know if Kali is going to answer all of them, but if you want a data expert, Kali is the guy. So let's see how much of that Kali will be able to give us. Kali, thank you very much. Over to you. We're going to share a computer, so you'll see Kali next up on my screen.
Tony, thanks. And Brent, I'll just say next when we want to move on to the slide. So thanks, Tony, to Brent to inviting me to share my thoughts and experiences that we're having around data. And I know a number of the presenters previously have talked about how South Africa is quite advanced and more willing to be innovative than the UK, which is where I come from. And hopefully you'll enjoy the presentation, and then we'll have an opportunity at the end to answer any questions. My presentation is available for you, Brent and Cover. I've got the presentation, so there's going to be a few facts that I go through, so no need to take notes. I think you can get copies of the presentation. So the approach I've taken for around the next 30 minutes is initially to provide some statistics and some figures from research around data, and really to get a feel for how data is growing within our environment, and particularly now for the value chain from the and then the service providers, and how we really should be leveraging all the processes that we're running in the business. I'll go through that, you as businesses, but looking at some of the considerations for us as parts of that value chain, tried to come up with is a pragmatic view as to how you can leveraging the data and start implementing what we call the journey to AI. No data presentation would be complete without at least some mention of AI. And I won't go too deep into it because I know there's a session on it tomorrow. So just want to talk about some of the things that we can do. Then just want to introduce a concept. A number of people earlier this morning have talked about technology and integration and how we struggle with legacy systems and that there's no silver bullet. There's a proposition I want to float past you called Linkfinium, where we built an ecosystem with LinkTank, and we're trying to address some of the challenges in the industry. It doesn't cover all of them. And then finally, I thought I would finish off with our customer Efficient Wealth have kindly agreed that I can do a case study and present their case study around their digital transformation journey and how they're leveraging data to make better business decisions. So really the first one is a quote from MIT, Andrew McKay, that the world is one big data problem. And I think we've heard this morning that the rate of growth of data, the availability of data within an organization, the opportunity to use data from outside of an organization is growing very quickly. That was quick. So the rate of growth of data at the moment, 328.77 quintillion bytes of data is what we create every day. So that was from a Statistica and research that our marketing team have done. And then the important fact, and I think we've had it mentioned by a couple of the presenters this morning, is that over the last 2 years, we've added about 90% of the data that we have has been created in the last 2 years. So, you know, we had examples of Tesla, the autonomous driving, that's got to be very much data driven. There are lots of devices, we're sharing lots of video content, we're sharing lots on social media. So just to comprehend and get all of that data and see how we can get value from it, and can be very daunting for organizations if they're not familiar with how to start to use and get value from some of this data that's been created. And so this for me is a really important study by Business Research. Again, like we discussed this morning, they're saying if organizations invest in their data and their analytics capability, they've seen direct correlation to increase in revenues of around 8% and a reduction in cost by around 10%. So that was quite a wide, and I'll try and give you some examples of, the first, if we look at the first one on the left-hand side, 69% were saying they can make better strategic decisions. And from the industry we're in, those would be strategic decisions about markets we go into, products we launch, and they can all be based on actual data and facts, rather than traditionally where we've done a bit of a gut feel, or I think like one of the presenters earlier mentioned that, sometimes we're waiting 3 months to get a report from someone about some data, and by that time we're too late. You could have lost revenues, you could have lost customers. So having data at your fingertips has helped organizations make better strategic decisions. 54% have said improved operational processes. And if we take an example of a broker, a financial advisor, they'll collect data, they'll write it on paper, they'll send it to the insurers to get a quote, you get a quote back. When you take on that policy, then somebody else is generally manually re-entering that data again. But by being able to connect and link those processes and automatically transfer data and not only use single source of truth, is really helping improve those operational processes, and then it's across the business area. Another example we'll pick up in terms of enhanced customer insights. With the Efficient Group and with LinkTank, we've done quite a lot of work to look at how we can get a single view of a customer and then actually work out how we can get a larger wallet share by cross-selling and upselling based on facts and based on data. The cost reduction across the operations, we talked about examples earlier around being able to use data that you have internally and maybe going to data sources like TransUnion that were on the call earlier to try and identify fraudulent cases and hence reduce the cost of claims. So again, helping reduce costs across the whole area of the business. And there are so many opportunities, and you'll see some of those through the case study from Efficient. Here's another slide, just taking you through the amount of data that we're growing and the different sources of that data. So increased internet usage across the board, and particularly through COVID, we've seen now everybody, this is a good example, we're doing a virtual conference and there's data, people are sending messages across, it's just exponential. And then we're also using multiple devices to connect to that same data, and it's tracking different information, social media and user-generated content. Again, the teens of this generation, that's all they live on. They're on their phones all day, so the amount of content that's being generated is incredible. And then through digital transformation, we're moving a lot of paper-based processes. In our area, it could be notification of claims, it could be some of the fact finds, and moving it all to digital. So that again is creating lots more data, and then the rise of big data analytics. Until we pulled this slide, I've not heard of a zettabyte of data, but I've got a fact later, and it's a lot of data. So by 2025, we'll generate 160 zettabytes of data annually. And for all of that data, only a small percentage of that data is being stored, and that may be because of legacy technology. And I know Tavio earlier mentioned architectures are changing, we're moving to the cloud. It's much easier now and much cheaper to get additional storage. So we're anticipating, and then from this research, it's showing that more and more data will be stored. And by 2025, 25% of all the data generated will actually be starting to be used in real-time processing. So, we heard earlier from Amrita around fraud. And one of the things that I often talk to our customers about in the insurance space is, we should be detecting fraud at point of sale and not at point of claim. And that data is available. It may not be available to you internally in your organization, but there are third-party data sources. There's data from the Insurance Crime Bureau that can be pulled in at point of sale. So why give somebody a policy if you can detect it at that stage? It's a much better solution, I think, than waiting till claim stage. So we need to look at that whole value chain and look at what data can help us with what sort of processes. And just want to leave you with, next slide, with one thought. So, you know, all morning we've been talking about big data, and you've just seen now from some of the surveys how much data is being generated. But I think the most important for a message I want to sort of share with you, and I'd like you to think about how you implement this, is based on the data that we have and the accurate data, what actionable insights can you get from that? So what do you do with that data? And I can relate it back to the fraud process. You know, if you find that the first notification of loss, it's not a fraudulent claim, then do straight through processing and pay the claim. If you find that it's a suspected claim, maybe change your business processing. You can ask a number of more questions to identify whether it is. And we talked about that red, amber, green earlier, scorecard for claims. And if you know at that stage, if you detect it is a claim, then try and persuade the person not to claim, or at least explain the consequences of them claiming and it being a fraudulent claim. It's going to affect their credit score. They could end up in prison. They could. So not everybody who deals in the always knows the impacts. And one of the areas we're having a lot of issues with, people are trying to inflate claims, you know, with the economy in the state it is, and it's just been able to detect that and then take the right actions at that point where you're on the call center. It reduces your internal costs because you've dealt with the claim in the right way, and the consumers are aware of the consequences. Brett, can we just go to the next one? So here now, again, if you can click again, just look at some of the considerations that we within the insurance space should be thinking about. And this is from a recent study by McKinsey, again, finding that data-driven companies outperform their competitors by up to 20%. And over the next 5 years, this is important for all of us on this call. You know, the areas we should be looking at is customer experience, pricing, and product. You know, that customer experience we mentioned earlier, and I think Tavio, you mentioned it earlier as well, that we now all expect an omni-channel experience. Whether we're coming in via the phone, whether we're coming in via our mobile, whether we're coming in via a tablet, if we've started a journey for a quote, we expect to be able to continue it on a different device or through a different channel. And we expect the organization to have that data and not ask us to provide that data again. And there are so many businesses still. I actually had personal experience where you provided that data. On a call center, you get passed to a different department and they're asking you for that data again. You know, that's not a pleasant customer experience. You're waiting for an hour on a phone to try and register a claim or a change of address. And we need to be looking at how we can use that opportunity to move forward with digital transformation and provide these journeys through a digital. So here's another sort of conference that Gartner have been running, and Gartner are looking at the trends around data and data analytics and three sort of angles. What does it mean for a business? At the bottom, what does it mean for platform and ecosystems? You know, this is really, really important. I think we a number of previous presenters have mentioned this. It's looking at how can we all create an ecosystem where we provide what we're good at and not just look for one organization to do everything. And then one of the key things from the survey was that data sharing is essential. You can see that overlap between businesses and platform ecosystems. And then we'll talk later about some of the challenges in achieving that. But there are solutions out there, and you know, you don't need to always to start looking at use cases where you can share data, start getting value in a business, and then move on from there. And on the right-hand side, I know there's a lot of talk about AI and how it's taking humans out of jobs or humans out of decision-making. AI has a purpose, and it'll be discussed on tomorrow in a lot more detail, but it doesn't eliminate the need for human decisions. Those still need to be there. technology should be used to process large volumes of data, to provide insights that then we as humans can make those decisions. So a lot of companies I go to, if we're trying to sell these data solutions, are worried that they're going to be made redundant or they're not needed anymore. But they've got to realize, and it's one of the things that I try and talk to them about, I think, and I don't know whether it's Octavio, I think you mentioned that Excel's got a limit of 1 million rows or something. If you've got 1 million rows on an Excel and you're sitting there and trying to analyze it, that's probably weeks or months of work. You've got an AI model, that's seconds of work. It will give you the output that's probably going to be more accurate, that you can then use to make the relevant decisions. So it's a key thing. And so don't be afraid of embracing technology. And like I said, a lot of the times when we're out there selling, it's always, we do things in a particular way. And those are the types of organizations that are going to fall behind or die. So some of the challenges, and I think most of these have been mentioned by the earlier presenters, so I won't spend too long on them. One is particularly around data quality, consistency, and standardization. And quite often, because historically, a lot of the broking area has been paper-based, handwritten stuff that then gets put into maybe a quotation system that then puts into a different policy administration system. We just got to improve that and then constantly look at how you can improve that data quality. And sometimes the way to do it is to use the data you've got internally and go to a third-party source. So if you want to clean up the address database or you want to clean up date of births or something, there are data sources that you can bring in and compare what you've got and cleanse that data. In the businesses we're in insurance, it's always been product-based systems. So we operate in silos. Short-term insurance doesn't talk to life and pensions or long-term insurance. And we need to start pulling that data from all of those different systems so that we can make those decisions. And operational data is often spread across databases, spreadsheets, mobile apps, etc. And it's how can you start to standardize and encourage users of that data to sort of store it in a single place rather than having multiple copies of it in different places. And I know even more recently, things like with Microsoft or with iCloud, we are starting Google Cloud. We're all starting to have single documents that we share and we update as opposed to having multiple copies on our local machines. Use MI and business intelligence and data visualization tools. Sometimes picture speaks 1,000 words. I personally find when I want to do my monthly reporting, I prefer to start with a dashboard rather than lots of numbers in a spreadsheet that you can then drill down into. And those tools are now relatively cheap, and there are large skills around in the market to be able to deploy those. I mean, one of the challenges we face, we've talked about legacy systems, is integrating those to modern real-time data sources. There's technologies around now, and we'll look at one of them later, that are making that easier and then maybe requiring less technical skills. And then, you've got to integrate AI and machine learning into this process and get data from IoT devices. Hopefully we'll chat a little bit about that later. And it's key. And if you don't do it, you're going to fall behind. So this was a survey from Jen presented at the last forum. If you can, Brent, just click onto the next slide. And I'm just going to take one message from this slide was, the top one, it's one of the challenges that has been fed back is the lack of integration options. And so what I don't know is whether, and maybe we'll have a chat with Jen later, and she can elaborate on that a bit later, is whether that's because the brokers and the FSPs are not aware and don't have the relationships with the technology vendors, or whether genuinely they feel that those options aren't there. And it'd be good to have a discussion around how that can be made easy and how people can start looking at that as a challenge. And the next one. So when we're looking at data, we call this the data wheel within the data company. There are a number of things that we end up doing with data. Some of them are technically complex, some of them are relatively straightforward. But as an organization, you should start thinking about these. One of them on the far left is data migration. Moving into modern technology and moving off legacy systems involves moving your data and transferring it to the new system. But there are sort of things you need to think about, whether you want to archive some of that data, whether you want to cleanse some of that data during data migration, whether you want to improve the quality of that. On the second hand, we've got the data integration. This for me is a key must, and I'd ask all businesses to start looking at this. And this data integration is, for me, not just data that you've got within your organization. Like Tony mentioned earlier, now there are data providers, and we've had a presentation from TransUnion earlier, Equifax, we've got Lightstone, we've got OneBase, and we'll talk about some of that. How do you use third-party data to integrate to allow you to get better information and get advantage over your competition? The next one is data management. You've got to create a single source of truth. If you start to proliferate and you allow people to update the same data from lots of different places and you store it on different databases, you start getting the inaccuracies. You've got to start thinking about, we call it a master slave. If you're updating data about a customer in a CRM, then you shouldn't be able to update that data from somewhere else. Or if you do, then you need to use the integration to synchronize that data. And data analytics, you can get some very quick wins very easily by starting to run some data analytics. From that, getting data insights, we've got on number 5, and then data visualization. And then those tools, like we said, are now commonly available. And then you can have skills within the organization. And if not, they're relatively affordable skills to get from outside in the market. So at the data company, we've created our own 6-step process to try and break down what we call the journey to artificial intelligence. And for different use cases, so at the bottom, you've got the data that you've got within the organization. You've then got data that you can buy in, so some of the sources I've already mentioned. But like other presenters have mentioned as well, you need an architecture and an environment where there's data we don't know about. There could be new IoT devices that are created, Fitbits, that wasn't around 10 years ago. So we need to be able to ingest data that we don't know about today, but will come tomorrow. So initially we call it data plumbing and consolidation, enriching and cleaning. So you need some sort of platform or some sort of service where you can pull all of that data together and have it cleansed before you try and start to visualize it. So that, the next steps in that journey, and each of you as businesses will be at a different stage. Some of you will have implemented AI and will be running with this and would have completed this journey. Some of you won't even have started to it. So what we're trying to do here is almost a step-by-step guide to say, if you're going along it, try and identify a use case. And I can give you a simple scenario now of, first notification of loss. There are certain rules that if somebody's committed fraud and you've got that data from Experian, then you want to reject the claim. For me, initially, you're pulling that data from the policy administration system, the claim system, you're going up the chain, and then it's level 4 where you've got automated decisions. Based on certain rules, you'll either reject the claim or you'll accept the claim. But then you can go further. You've got a lot of historical data, and you can start building predictive models and AI around that data, which is to say, if over the last 10 years, every January, this person didn't pay their premium, then there's an issue, and the following year, the same thing's going to happen. So don't worry about it. But if somebody's always been paying and they suddenly stop paying premiums for 2 or 3 months, that's an issue. And then the final stage of that is, how do you operationalize it? So these things shouldn't be just reports that are brought to monthly management meetings. It's got to be real time and get real value from the business. So it's operationalizing those. Brent, if we go on to the next one, just getting conscious of time. So I'll put this wheel up. I'm not going to spend a lot of time because like Tony was saying, you've got a session tomorrow on this. But when you're looking at AI, there's a number of elements you need to consider. You can use it through chatbots to provide a personalized service based on, you bought this, you might want to buy this. That's one of the most common. And, you bought this book, the same authors released this one, that type of stuff. Or, you bought motor insurance, but you haven't taken legal cover up to particular. Then there's a natural language processing, looking at the data that you've got, trying to match that data. And we've used a lot of this to look at emails, look at things where they may have a policy number and a client name to access data from different systems. We implemented this for a large bank around their death claims processing to make that the process for a beneficiary much easier because they probably wouldn't have access to all of the information about what products the individual had who's deceased with that particular bank. Sentiment analysis. This is trawling all of the data to find out what people are saying about you on the internet or in different areas, and then being able to respond accordingly. Computer vision, we've seen, you know, a lot of people now are using this for simulation, for training, training and education. And then the final one we've got out here is predictive analytics. This is where you're looking for anomaly detection, and we're using it quite a lot in fraud, you know, or whether the person's going to buy this policy. So if you again analyze the last 10 years worth of data and you find out he gets a quote from you every year but never buys, you know, you may not want to treat that as a very well qualified lead, and you may score a different one who hasn't been to you before that you want to follow up and try. And so again, like I said, I'm sure there's going to be a lot more discussion around this tomorrow. So Linkfinium. So Jen and myself presented at the Cover InsurTech conference in 2020, pre-COVID. It was the last day I was in South Africa for a couple of years. And from the two presentations, we talk about ecosystems. We both had a view that what the industry needs for the FSPs is a cheap, affordable solution where data is connected and they can start getting valuable analytics and dashboards and portals to help them run their businesses more efficiently. So the diagram you see here was Jen putting together all of the data sources from their experience they thought that could be relevant for this type of hub. And then what we've tried to, so we came up with this concept and we've named the product Linkfinium, where what we're doing over a period of time, as and when through our projects, we're accessing certain systems or data sources, we're building APIs, and then from that, you can pull that data into Linkfinium. It's all cleansed and correlated. We get a single customer view, and we allow organizations then to build mobile apps and client portals on that data, dashboards, and sort of visualization. And again, over time, we're not there yet. You know, the journey's still early. Over time, we want to be able to provide that so they're an FSP. If they want 5 dashboards and they want 5 connectors, they can buy that as a package. So just onto this. So what I want to finish off with now is just a case study for Efficient Wealth. Efficient Wealth have grown through mergers and acquisitions, and they have a number of lines of business, number of CRM systems, a number of financial planning systems because of the businesses they've acquired. And they were struggling to get a single customer view. So through a vendor selection process, we proposed a digital transformation journey, which we positioned as low risk, but could give them high value, but would also allow them to change their mind when the market changed and plug in different systems by creating an orchestration layer that can pull data in and then generate all of their dashboards. That sort of ends my presentation, and I thought it was important to show you the case study of where organizations that have embarked upon this journey are starting to get business benefits. And I'm just going to hand over to Tony.
Great. Thank you very much for that, Cully. Very interesting. Just building on this theme of data and the availability of data, etc. One of the things for me with regards to data that I always think about when I talk about data is that I think in the past we tended to hoard data rather than house it and store it for purposes of using it. And we had these chambers and rooms full of data that was hoarded, and we didn't really know when we're going to use it, etc. And by the time that we want to use it, we didn't know where it was, etc. And I like the fact that you mentioned the ecosystem, because with the ecosystem, you can decide what data you actually house and what data you don't, what data you go and fetch when you need it from somebody who's housing it maybe more efficiently. And So it's a whole, as you say, ecosystem of what do we do with data and how we employ that. But I'm going to hand over for a bit of comment from Paul Donnelly, the Executive Vice President for EMEA at FINEOS. And Paul, maybe just from your perspective, I know FINEOS is quite involved, especially in, I mean, if we talk data, large data sets with employee benefits business across globally, and then also on the health system side, etc. So maybe you can just give us a bit of input from your side on the whole data issue.
From traveling across the world, I've now traveled across the desk. It shows how, I suppose, if we ever needed an example of how we have become so reliant on technology and it does let us down sometimes, we kind of encapsulated it right there. We kind of walked through it. To kind of respond to what you were saying, Tony, maybe I'll do a bit of background to myself and what brings me here. So I have about 15 years experience in very specifically the life and health insurance industry. So very little general insurance. I spent the vast bulk of that with Munich Re, where I ran a Europe, Middle East and Africa team, including South Africa, which provided automation of the underwriting process. And that's a really interesting, so I'm going to stop there. I will talk a bit about FINEOS now, but it's not a bad way to talk through it. The underwriting process is, if we're going to be talking about data, the underwriting process is possibly where data is collected. And there are a couple of things about that which I'd love to say. One of them is, I mean, I mean, it's half joking, but only half. I'm not sure I've met an underwriter who didn't want more information. So there is a tendency to always want more and more and more knowledge and there is this trade-off between trying to achieve perfect knowledge and achieving something that's just good enough. It's also a place where data and quite in life and health, quite extensive data is collected. So, you know, when Callie was talking there, he was talking really about the scale, and this is maybe more in general insurance. I'd say in life and health, the challenge is there is a scale challenge, certainly. Some of our FINEOS customers, MetLife, Human, etc., would have millions and tens of millions of customers. And so they would be maintaining a lot of data. But what's interesting in the life and health space is the obligations that we as insurers or we in the space put ourselves under by collecting this personally identifiable information. We look at POPI or GDPR, and you can see how the regulator is actually quite rightly and quite well meant, trying to make sure that there is a higher standard that we hold ourselves to as custodians of this data. And when you think about the life and health underwriting process, you collect someone's darkest secrets, health secrets, financial secrets, even family history information. There is a joke, which in our industry, that sometimes in the underwriting process, you collect data for joint lives where the husband or wife wouldn't tell their partner or hasn't told their partner about X, Y, Z. So you really are collecting very sensitive data, and it's right, therefore, that we hold ourselves to this very high standard. So layering on top of what Callie was saying about the challenge with the scale of the data, there's also the sensitivity around it. Callie spoke a little bit about some of the age of some of these core systems that we as an industry depend upon, and they do function. Like, let's be blunt about it. The great news is they do the job that they were intended to do 20, 30, in some cases 40 years ago. The challenge today is the world has changed, and our human expectations of technology and of the behavior of organizations that we as individuals deal with has changed. And so we have to we have to be able to explain to our customers and explain to the regulator what information we hold, where we hold it, who has access to it, when it was last accessed, what purpose it was put for, etc. And with these old systems, well built as they were to the standards of that time, they do not meet this challenge. And increasingly, we're going to end up with this tear between the societal expectation on us as an industry and our ability to meet that expectation, and that is a challenge. So there's a quote, and I apologize for this. You can't have a conversation on data without the phrase "data is the new oil." We all know that this John Humby line. Data is the new oil. In certain cases, and again, half joking, but only half again, I think we should also think about it. The data might in fact be the new asbestos. That, unless we are ready as organizations, unless we have the processes there, unless we have the people, the competence, and the systems. And so, many of the people who are talking come very much from the system side, but I think it is all of these pieces. It's a competence piece, an understanding of the challenges, it's a process piece, and also it is a systems piece that is needed in order to help us move forward into the next generation. If I can roll forward from my time at Bagary and more on the underwriting side to now FINEOS. FINEOS is a provider historically of claims admin and management systems, again, only for life and health. We have maybe 50 organizations around the world using our technology. In more recent years, and the great thing about the insurance industry is, what I mean by more recent years for us is in the last 5 to 7 years, we have built a range of a modular core system. And so to do policy administration, billing, payments, provider management, and that is a rapidly developing part of our business for some of the reasons I kind of went into. The interesting place is that if you think about underwriting as a place where data is collected, claims is a place where data is heavily used. I mean, underwriting, you also need financial information, medical information, etc. But in the claims process, there's a lot of opportunities to streamline a really potentially intrusive process at a time, at a moment that matters heavily to the claimant, whether it's a infection disability claimant or it is you're addressing a bereaved family member. We as an industry want to live up to, Carly mentioned, the customer experience part of this. We really need to do that as an industry. But at the same time, we can't afford to cut corners. So we have to look at how we can streamline, automate, and take some of the friction, so to speak, out of that process. And data and and rudimentary automation, and then ultimately AI and machine learning driven automation are key parts of that. And in fact, it's kind of happening today in an unsung, unglamorous fashion. So our claims process will have rules around complexity, potentially predicting claim duration, to identify is this potentially a short-term disability case which might bridge into one of these creeping catastrophic cases, and to make sure that we're bringing first off a specialized team with the authorities to invest in that claim. So we say with rehabilitation measures, with additional supports, because over time, we've all seen in life and health, we've all seen where a claimant will claim for a musculoskeletal issue, which keeps them at home, having only daily contact with the delivery driver, but drinking a bit too much and watching daytime TV. Because I've noticed, by the way, in sports mad South Africa, there is, if you're a soccer or rugby fan, it's an easy trap to fall into, I have to say. So you can, but you can end up in this situation, which then becomes more of a tricky, hard to define psychological issue. So we as an industry, we need to make sure that we're we're doing right by our clients, both in terms of the, as custodians of their data, that we're not holding data that we have no purpose for, and that we are making the best use in the interest of the client for this, and whether that is for the support of the decision support of humans